think one of the strangest experiences a person can go through is entering a reality they've never psychologically lived before. Because people assume growth feels good, linear, exciting, empowering. But honestly, a lot of real growth feels disorientating at first. Not because something is wrong, but because your nervous system has no reference point for what's happening. And I think this is especially true when it comes to money, opportunity, success, expansion, or any major life shift, because the human mind is heavily shaped by familiarity. We don't just operate from logic, we operate from conditioning, from repetition, from emotional memory, from lived experience. And eventually there comes a moment where your external reality starts moving beyond your internal calibration. That's where things get interesting, because logically you know things are improving, but emotionally part of you still feels like the old version of yourself. And that creates a very strange internal split. One part of you says, this is possible. Another part quietly says, this doesn't feel normal. And I think a lot of people misunderstand that feeling. They think, maybe I'm not confident. Maybe I'm self-sabotaging. Maybe I don't deserve this. But often, it's simply unfamiliarity. You haven't lived this before. And that matters more than people realise. Because the nervous system is constantly scanning for what it feels known, not necessarily what's good, what's familiar. That's why people sometimes return to chaos, old habits, toxic dynamics, poor decisions, emotional overreaction. Not because those things are healthy, but because they're recognised by the body. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar expansion. That's one of the biggest paradoxes of human behaviour. And honestly, I think this explains so much of what happens during periods of transformation. Especially when a person begins transitioning from survival-based thinking into something more structured, more intentional, more regulated. Because at first, the new reality can almost feel emotionally fake, even when it's happening. And that's a bizarre experience. You can literally be watching your life shift in real time, while another part of your mind struggles to believe it. And I think this is where people need to develop compassion for themselves, not excuses, compassion. Because adapting to expansion is a real psychological process. Especially if your earlier life conditioned you toward scarcity, hypervigilance, stress, uncertainty, or emotional instability. Your body learns those patterns. It learns survival. So when life starts becoming calmer, or more abundant, or more structured, the nervous system can initially interpret that as unfamiliarity, as danger. That's important to understand, because many people sabotage peaceful opportunities simply because peace feels unfamiliar. People sabotage peace because chaos feels more recognisable to the nervous system. And markets expose this constantly. You'll see people panic sell, overtrade, revenge trade, chase emotionally, rotate impulsively, Not because they lack intelligence, because their nervous system is trying to regain emotional familiarity. Chaos becomes addictive. Stillness feels uncomfortable. And I think one of the biggest shifts as an operator makes is learning how to tolerate stillness, learning how to remain calm when nothing dramatic is happening, learning how to stop manufacturing urgency. Because urgency and emotional intensity can become identity patterns too, especially for people who've spent years under pressure. And honestly, I think this is one of the hidden transitions nobody talks about when things begin improving. The grief of leaving an old identity behind, because even painful identities become familiar over time. The struggling version of you, the anxious version, the reactive version, the constantly surviving version. You know that person. You've lived as that person. So when a calmer version of you begins emerging, there's almost a temporary disorientation, like, who am I if I am no longer operating from chaos? That's deep work. And I think this is why observation matters so much, because observation creates separation between you and your conditioned reactions. Without observation, people become their emotions. With observation, people can start understanding their emotions. That changes everything, because now instead of something feels wrong, you can say, no, this just feels unfamiliar. And that's a huge distinction. One creates panic, the other creates awareness. And awareness gives you choice. That's power. And honestly, I think this is where emotional maturity really begins. The ability to sit inside unfamiliar growth without immediately sabotaging it. To remain present while your identity recalibrates, to allow reality to expand without emotionally running back toward limitation. That's difficult work, quiet work, internal work, but it matters. Because eventually, if you stay calm long enough, the unfamiliar becomes familiar. The new standards settle into the new nervous system. The new behaviour becomes natural. The new identity stabilises. And suddenly, the thing that once felt impossible starts feeling normal. That's when real transformation happens. Not when circumstances first change, but when your nervous system finally stops resisting the change. That's the shift. And maybe that's why growth can feel so strange at first. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're becoming someone you've never been before. Calm. Structured. Executed.